Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Meredith E. Phillips. I'm a writer, reader, and bunny mama. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 favorite books with an asterisk because this was really hard to narrow down. I have a lot of favorite books and a lot of them are so vastly different it's hard to say whether I like one more than the other. So I've picked a selection of some of my favorite books to share with you today. There is only one that is like my top favorite book of all time, which I think I've talked about previously in another video, but I'll share that one with you first, and then after that I'm just going to share them in the approximate order in which I read them. So I have some here that were childhood favorites and I have some that are more recent reads. So my all-time favorite book is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I read this for the first time when I was in 8th grade and I immediately connected with the character of Jane. I loved her. I saw a lot of similarities between her persona and mine, but there was a lot about her too that was inspiring. She's a little bit of an outsider. She's quiet, but she's also not going to let people walk all over her. As I've reread this book in the years since, different things have stood out to me at different times. When I reread this book after I had started teaching, the first several chapters take place at the beginning of Jane's life when she's a young girl. I think she's 8 or 10 years old at the beginning, and I was teaching kids a little bit younger than that, but I was still getting to know how kids acted and how their minds worked and what made them frustrated and what made them excited. And the way that Charlotte Bronte writes about this child is incredibly realistic in my opinion. There's times at the beginning of the novel where Jane is acting out in anger because she doesn't have yet the words to express herself and make the adults in her life understand what is wrong. And that kind of frustration is very common in children, and I was just incredibly amazed at how well she portrayed that in the beginning of this book. There were other sections later on. When I graduated from college, I had been dating who would become my husband for about a year, and he was living down where my college was, and I moved 4 hours back home, so we were long distance for like a year before we got married. Toward the end of this book, there is portions where Jane is separated from her love interest, Mr. Rochester, and so a lot of the emotions that she was feeling and going through at that point in the book was very relatable for me. And overall, this is just a gorgeous story of resilience and empowerment. The next book I want to talk about is probably the first story here that I read, or had read to me really, and it is East of the Sun and West of the Moon. It's a traditional, I believe, Norwegian fairy tale, and this version of it in particular, now of course that it's a fairy tale, so a billion people have written their own versions of it. I don't even think there's an author attributed for this book. East of the Sun and West of the Moon is very similar in a lot of ways to the Beauty and the Beast story. If you've read Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you've read that, her story is very similar to this. I know a lot of people compare that book to Beauty and the Beast, and of course there are very much similarities there, but in my mind when I read it, I was like, this is absolutely a retelling of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. This version in particular though is illustrated by Kay Nielsen, and these illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. I'll see if I can show you one of them here. Isn't that beautiful? Look her up online. She was an illustrator for a long time, and any of her illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. But I loved this fairy tale. It was magical in a lot of ways. But the other thing that I really love about this fairy tale in particular is that in the end, essentially, the main heroine saves the hero instead of the other way around. And I really enjoyed seeing sort of the woman have to go through the trials and save the prince, so to speak, instead of sort of the way it usually is in the typical sort of Disney fairy tales. Next up, I have the Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I only have one of them here with me, and it is These Happy Golden Years, which is I think the second to last book in the sort of official series. The series follows Laura Ingalls Wilder, Laura Ingalls when the book starts, and her family who begin in the woods of Minnesota. Is that where they start? They started in the woods. And it shows them traveling out west in a covered wagon. And it is a true story. It's her memoir, essentially. It's gorgeously written. It's sort of a little vignette of what life was like at that time, but it's written for children. When I was little, my mom read me all of the books. They were like our bedtime story books for a really long time because we read all of them. There's, I think, 8 books, something like that. I loved all of them, but this one is my favorite. I think I liked romance from the time I was a little kid because this is the book where Laura is, you know, a little more grown up and Almanzo is courting her in the book. And when he like proposed, I was so giddy reading or hearing it being read to me. I was just beside myself with excitement when he was picking her up to take her home and all this different stuff. I was really excited about it. And there's a section at the end of this book that is so sweet. During the time when they're engaged, Almanzo is building a house for them, and Laura doesn't get to see it while he's building it because it would be very inappropriate for him to take her out there, just the two of them. So after the wedding, he finally gets to take her home to this house that he has built for them. And the end of this book, the very end, it shows him showing her the house and all the different things that he's built into it. And she's noticing how he didn't just build a house, he built a house for her. There's different things that he shows her that he's specifically done to be for her, in her taste, or that is going to be convenient for her. And it's so sweet. I love it. So the Little House on the Prairie books are one of my favorites. The next book is one that I would love to know if you've heard of this book before, because I don't feel like anyone talks about it. I don't even know if it's even in print anymore. It might be out of print, but it is The Pushcart Wars by Jean Merrill. And then this book I read when I was in 5th grade, and you can see that right on the front there. You see, yeah, Meredith Webb. I was number 24 that year. This book was one that we read in class, which is about push carts in New York City being overrun by the giant 18-wheeler trucks. But the way the author writes the story, she's writing it as though these were real events, and there's like fake newspaper clippings and stuff in the story. And I remember being really confused. Like, I was pretty sure when we started the book that it was just fiction, but it felt so real. I thought I was getting really confused. Like, did this really happen or what? Because these guys on the front cover look pretty legit. I also, in typical me form, I notated the date that I started and finished reading it. So I basically invented Goodreads, but it's fine. Anyway, I don't know if you can get this anymore or if it's available as an ebook or something like that, but if you can, it's a very delightful little story of sort of the underdog defeating the big bad. Next up, I have a book that I read my sophomore year in high school. Well, really a trilogy of books, and that is the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. These books were so important to me in high school. I can't hold these all up for the entirety of this section, so we're just gonna put them down. I'll hold up one. I read the first one of these right after the first movie came out. I saw the movie over Christmas break in 2001, and I loved it. I loved it. There was no way I was gonna wait a whole year until the next movie came out to find out what happened. So I went out and bought copies of all the books and read them all back to back in like a week and a half. I was obsessed. And there's a lot about the book that is very wrapped up with the movie for me, for obvious reasons, but it was such an important time in my life. I was really struggling. I mean, I'd gone through a year of high school already. I was in a very different environment than I was used to. I was struggling to make friends, and the love for this story and this group of characters and the themes in this story really helped me to make friends, because there were other people in my class who were also then obsessed with Lord of the Rings after the movies came out, and so we kind of like bonded over this movie franchise and the books. We all read the books like a million times in high school. And the other thing that for me was really, I think, helpful on a subconscious level was the fact that the first movie came out in December of 2001. And of course, just a few months before that, we had September 11th. That was an event that for me is a dividing line in my life. There is pre 9/11 and there is post 9/11. We lived right outside of Washington, D.C. at the time, and it happened in my backyard. The thing in these books that was so heartening and encouraging is, you know, there's this group of characters is up against this seemingly impossible task, this evil overlord who is trying to take over everything, and they are trying so hard to save what is precious to them. And in the end, of course, they win. And so I think the idea of overcoming evil, which is what we were going through at the time, was so important to me to be able to see it played out in, even though it was a fictional book, obviously, it was important to me to see it played out in a story. So Lord of the Rings is definitely one of my favorite books of all time. Like I said, I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was in high school. Then I got to college, and by the time I got to college, I was really busy. I didn't read very much in college aside from the stuff I was having to read for my classes. And then after college, I graduated and I got a job teaching. And if any of you are teachers, or if you know about teachers, it is exhausting. There's a lot of wonderful things about teaching, but it is exhausting. And I did not find very much time to read for pleasure while I was teaching. However, in 2013, I ended up quitting teaching and going into a different field. Shortly after that, I found my excitement again for reading. And in 2015, I was starting to get really into YA fantasy. If you've been in the YA fantasy community for several years now, you might remember what came out in 2015, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I got like a sample chapter of this. I forget where I even got it from, but I got the first chapter of the book to read for free. And I read it on my Kindle and was like, where is the rest of this book? I need it immediately. I went out to the bookstore and I bought this copy of the book. I absolutely devoured it. And when I got to the end, Miss Bardugo had not made it clear to me, or at least I wasn't aware enough for it to be clear, that this was to be a duology. And if you've read the book and you know how it ends, I was on the floor screaming because the end of this book, you need the second book, okay? Both books are out now. Crooked Kingdom is the second book. You need both. You can't just read this one. So make sure you've got this one ready to go because you're gonna be on the floor if you're anything like me. I was literally like on the floor, just a mess. And then when I went online to see when this one was gonna come out, and it wasn't until like the next year, obviously, but I was just beside myself. It is so good. If you like Ocean's 11, you're gonna love this. This is basically teenagers with magical things and Ocean's 11 heisty stuff. It's fantastic. The characters in this book are so precious. The way she gets you to care about them is incredible. I mean, if you want deep characters with gorgeously written character arcs, this is it. This is the series to read. I read this in 2015, and then of course I read this one in 2016. I can't remember. I might have taken off the day from work. I'll do that sometime. If there's a book coming out where I'm like, I need it right now, I will take off the day from work so that all I get to do is read all day, because books usually come out on Tuesdays. Who decided that? Could they come out on Saturdays? That'd be a lot more convenient. Anyway, Six of Crows duology is one of my all-time favorites. Around the same time that I was reading Six of Crows, very shortly after that, I was introduced to V.E. Schwab in A Darker Shade of Magic, which is part of her Shades of Magic series. The first book is followed by A Gathering of Shadows, and then we have A Conjuring of Light, which is the third and final book in this arc. She has announced that she is planning to make another trilogy in this world in some capacity. It's supposed to take place like several years, I think, after the third book ends, but I don't think she's even started writing it yet. So we've got a minute to wait for that. However, highly recommend this book. We have parallel Londons, we have blood magic, we've got pirates, like it's everything. It's perfect. The first book, you could honestly, I think, read this almost as a standalone. It definitely ends sort of open-ended, but it's not like a huge cliffhanger ending. If you read book 2, however, Gathering of Shadows, cliffhanger. There's a huge cliffhanger at the end of this one. I was, again, on the floor wailing when I finished it. And then Conjuring of Light is the third book. This book, and this is not a spoiler, I'll just say this, there's a part toward the end. It's not, I guess it's a chapter. It's like a page and a half. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I have ever read. It is absolutely gorgeous, and I would say that reading the whole trilogy just for that page and a half is worth it. Not that the rest of the book is poorly written or anything like that, but that little section in here is so beautiful. Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. You need to read it. The only book on my list that I do not have a physical copy of, which I do want to get a physical copy soon at some point, but that book is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Now I think her most popular book is Uprooted, which I also read and really enjoyed. I read that several years ago. I liked it, and I knew she had Spinning Silver as another book of hers, and for some reason I was like, that's nice, and I just didn't pick it up. Like, why? If you enjoyed a book by an author, why would you not then go immediately pick up the next book that she had out? I don't know what my problem was, but I finally read it last year. This book is another one that is so gorgeously written. If you're looking for a book that's written like a fairy tale, Naomi Novik is your girl. She has such beautiful prose. I don't think it's super flowery or over the top, but just so whimsical and fantastical, and it just has the best fairy tale vibe to it. The story focuses on several different women and how their stories eventually intersect by the end of the story, and the book has one of my all-time favorite book quotes in it, which is, "But I had not known that I was strong enough to do any of those things until they were over and I had done them. I had to do the work first, not knowing." I love that. I actually have it as like a sticky thing on my computer, so anytime I open my computer, it's sitting there looking at me. It's such an inspirational quote. I love it. I have it in several places in my office. So yes, I highly recommend Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver. Okay, we're almost at the end. I have 2 books left. Shortly after I read Darker Shade of Magic, I ended up picking up The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is one of the most beautifully written books I have ever read from start to finish. And I would say don't read too much about it. It's one of those books that's really best if you go into it a little bit blind. I think all you need to know is there's a magical circus and magicians. The writing in here is fantastic. This was the type of book that as soon as I finished it, I wanted to go back to the beginning immediately and just start reading it again because it was so good. The characters are really lovely. The story is just so rich, and the world she's created in here is so magical. Absolutely enthralling. Highly recommend that you pick up The Night Circus if you have not already. Okay, the final one is the one that I have most recently read, and I think I read this back in 2017, but it is Only Beloved by Mary Balog. I know I've mentioned this in a couple other videos before. This is the final book in her Survivors series, and while I do think you could read it as a standalone, I think it's best read as the final book in the series. The main character in this book is featured heavily in the previous books, and so if you've read the previous books, you already love him so much by the time you get to this book. You also get to meet the main love interest in a previous book, and it just culminates and wraps up the series so beautifully that I would definitely recommend reading the other books. The other books are great too, but this one to me is just absolutely the best of the bunch. The other thing that I really love about this book is that it features slightly older characters. The main heroine is 38, 39 at the beginning of the book, and the main hero character is 48. I feel like in romance novels, especially in historical romances, because people back in the day used to get married at an earlier age, the characters tend to be younger, in their late teens, like 18, 19, or early 20s. Maybe they might be in their late 20s. By the time you get to your late 30s, early 40s, there's a different type of maturity about those types of characters. And it's not that 20-somethings are immature necessarily, but they do have a different level of maturity than somebody who's 10, 15 years older than that. Although I like reading historical romances with younger characters, it doesn't bother me. It is refreshing sometimes to read a book where the characters featured are a little bit older. And the way these two characters come to be married and then come to truly love each other is just, it's so good. It's so beautiful. It's very slow. It's a very character heavy book. There's of course a plot here, but it is very character heavy, which is typical for a lot of Mary Balog's books, and I love it. It's just a delight. You fall in love with these characters so easily. So those are my top 10, sort of, maybe. They're very much favorites. I don't know if they're my top 10. I'll probably think of like 15 other books after I've finished filming this that are also like some of my favorites, but how can you choose? You know, like Only Beloved versus Darker Shade of Magic, like how can you compare these? They're so different. How can I pick which is favorite and better? I can't. I hope some of those were maybe new. If you happen to pick up any of these books after watching this video and enjoy it or have thoughts on it, let me know for sure. If you've read any of these books, let me know if you enjoyed them or if you think I'm crazy for them being on my favorites list. How can you not like these? Like, I wouldn't understand, but that's your opinion, I guess. Let me know what some of your favorite books are, if any of these are also on your favorites list, or if you've created a video with your top favorite books of all time, link it in the comments. I'd love to go watch it. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more content from me, I post videos on Tuesdays and Fridays, so go ahead and click the subscribe button. You can also find me over on Instagram at Meredith Phillips Writes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye. How's my head still at the shot? Do we need to raise you up so my head'll be in the shot?